The sea never truly slept in the town of Windermere. It groaned and whispered, kissed the rocks with salt-stung breath, and pulled the fog ashore each evening like a weary lover drawing a blanket. The cliffs stood like old sentinels, watching, waiting, crumbling ever so slightly with each wave's caress. Atop one such cliff stood a crooked house with peeling paint and a rusted weather vane that hadn't spun in years. It was Eleanor's home, or rather, the place where she existed. Since her husband died 7 winters ago, Eleanor had learned to make peace with silence. The tick of the old kitchen clock, the whistling kettle, and the rhythmic sighs of the sea were her only companions. That, and the memories that lingered like dust in the corners. She wasn't unfriendly, merely quiet. The townsfolk called her kind but reserved, always wrapped in shawls and thoughts. Children said her house was haunted, maybe by ghosts, maybe by sadness. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in late October, and the fog had come early, thick and silver, swallowing the world beyond Eleanor's porch. She was just settling down with her chamomile tea when a soft sound drew her attention. A muffled meow, tentative and small. She opened the door and saw him. A cat, or rather a feline ghost. White as snow, with fur so clean it seemed to glow against the gray evening. One eye was a pale, piercing green. The other, a deep, icy blue. He stared at her as if he'd known her all his life. Eleanor knelt slowly. "Well, aren't you something?" He didn't flinch when she reached out. Instead, he stepped forward and pressed his head into her hand, purring like an old engine. That night, she laid out a saucer of cream and an old towel by the hearth. The cat curled up there without hesitation. When the fire crackled, he opened his mismatched eyes, gave her a slow blink, the kind that felt like a secret, and then drifted off to sleep. She named him Whiskers, though part of her thought he had already named himself long before meeting her. In the days that followed, Whiskers made himself entirely at home. He followed Eleanor from room to room, watched her knit, watched her dust, watched her pour tea. She spoke to him as if he were her husband returned, and in a way it felt like he had been sent, not to fill the space her love once occupied, but to sit beside it. They shared evenings by the fire, quiet walks through her overgrown garden, and long, companionable silences. Whiskers listened when she whispered to the sea. He never interrupted. He simply was. But then came the first odd thing. One night, Eleanor awoke with a start. The room was cold, the fire burned low, and the wind howled against the window panes. She checked the time. 3:33 a.m. She turned her head toward the window and froze. Whiskers sat on the windowsill, stiff as a statue, tail curled neatly around his paws. His gaze was fixed, unblinking, on the dense wall of fog beyond the glass. The moonlight cast a faint shimmer through his fur, making him look translucent, otherworldly. Eleanor whispered, "Whiskers." He didn't turn, didn't blink, just kept staring, as if waiting for something to appear in the mist. She padded over and knelt beside him. From her angle, she could see nothing, just thick fog wrapped around the cliffs, the sea hissing below. After a long minute, Whiskers finally blinked and leapt down without a sound. He brushed against her legs, purring faintly, and returned to his usual spot near the fire. But Eleanor remained at the window, heart quietly thudding, wondering what, or who, the cat had seen. Something had shifted. In the silence that followed, she realized it wasn't just the wind that howled anymore. The next morning, the fog was reluctant to lift. Eleanor stood at the kitchen sink, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, and watched the world outside remain gray and still. Whiskers sat on the windowsill as he often did now, his tail twitching. But his eyes weren't lazy or content. They were fixed, alert, trained on something unseen in the distant line of trees just beyond the yard. It was the same place he'd stared at during the night, the exact same spot. Eleanor glanced at the clock. 3:33 p.m. She frowned. For the next few days, the pattern repeated. Every morning, Whiskers lounged as if nothing mattered. But when the hour struck 3:33 a.m., he would leap from the foot of Eleanor's bed, pad silently to the window and sit, always staring at the woods, always silent, always still. It unsettled her more with each passing night. Then, on the fifth morning, she saw the paw prints. They trailed across the dusty hallway floor, dark, damp, distinct, small and muddy, leading to a door she hadn't opened in years. Her breath caught as she followed them to the end of the hall, to the pale blue door that hadn't moved since the day her daughter disappeared. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob. It was locked, just as she had left it. She sank to her knees, fingertips brushing one of the prints. The mud was fresh. Her voice cracked. "That's not possible." The door to Lily's room had remained untouched since the search was called off. 10 years old, dark hair like her father's, and a smile too wide for such a small face. She'd gone missing on a warm spring afternoon after playing in the woods. No trace, no footprints, just the toy compass she loved, found half buried near the creek. Eleanor had never truly recovered. She never left town again, never smiled the same, and she never opened that room, not once. It had become a shrine, prison of memories. She turned to find Whiskers behind her, watching. His mismatched eyes glowed faintly in the hallway gloom. "You were in there," she whispered. "But how?" Whiskers blinked slowly, then turned and padded away, tail curling like a question mark. That evening, Eleanor sat in Lily's rocking chair by the fire, running her hands along the smooth arms. Whiskers lay on the rug nearby, his gaze not on the flames, but on the bookshelf across the room. She followed his stare. "What?" she asked softly. The clock struck 3:33. Whiskers stood. He walked slowly toward the bookshelf, ears alert, body tense. Eleanor sat up straighter, watching as he paused, then raised a paw and began scratching, deliberate, insistent, at the floor beneath it. She moved cautiously, heart thudding. The bookshelf was heavy and old, filled with faded volumes of poetry and forgotten cookbooks. She reached the spot Whiskers was pawing and knelt beside him. The floorboard felt loose. She slid her fingers along the edge, pried at it gently. With a soft creak, the plank lifted. Beneath it lay a shallow hollow, and in it, wrapped in faded oilcloth, something small and square. Eleanor's breath caught, hands trembling. She lifted the bundle out and unwrapped it. Inside was a notebook, a child's notebook, pink with a smiling star on the front, smudged with age and moisture. Inside, in careful, looping letters, were diary entries. Her daughters. April 3rd, went to the woods with my compass again. I think I saw the white cat again. He's not scared of me. April 10th, I dreamed about the lighthouse again. Mama says there's no such thing, but I remember it. May 2nd, the man in the woods was watching today. I told the cat. He looked scared. Eleanor flipped the pages, her heart racing. Whiskers sat beside her, pressing gently against her arm, as if anchoring her to the moment. Her voice cracked. "Lily." She clutched the notebook to her chest. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. The last entry was short, a single sentence. "If something happens, follow Whiskers. He knows the way back." Eleanor stared at the words until they blurred. Whiskers curled up against her side, purring soft and steady. Somewhere in the distance, through the dark and fog, the wind shifted. And in that moment, Eleanor no longer doubted. Whiskers hadn't just chosen her. He had returned for her. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table, the pink notebook resting beside her, her hand wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of tea that had long since gone cold. The words her daughter had written echoed over and over in her mind. "If something happens, follow Whiskers. He knows the way back." The cat lay curled in the armchair across from her, one green eye half-lidded, the other, icy blue, watching her, unwavering. It wasn't fear she felt. It was something deeper, recognition, a feeling she couldn't quite name. At dawn, unable to stay still any longer, Eleanor returned to the spot beneath the bookshelf. She carefully lifted the loose floorboard again, heart racing, as if more answers might still be buried there. Her fingers brushed something solid. Another shape smaller than the journal. She pulled it free. A tiny, dust-covered wooden box with a delicate clasp. She opened it slowly. Inside was a folded piece of paper, old, yellowed, and drawn in crayon. It was Lily's. She'd know that handwriting anywhere. Large, loopy letters across the top read, "My dream." The drawing showed a forest, tall and tangled, and beyond it a lighthouse standing high on the cliffs, though no such structure had ever existed nearby. In the foreground stood a little girl with dark hair, and next to her, a white cat with mismatched eyes. Looming in the sky above them, drawn in heavy black strokes, was a strange symbol Eleanor didn't recognize, like a swirling spiral inside a triangle, with radiating lines like sun rays. She stared at it, heart pounding. Whiskers leapt down from the chair and came to her side, brushing against her ankle. "Was this you?" she whispered. "Were you with her? Even back then?" The cat looked up at her, unmoving. That morning, she dressed in her old boots and coat, the ones she hadn't worn in years, and let Whiskers out the front door. He paused on the step, glanced back at her, and then started walking, slow but sure, down the lane. She followed. Whiskers led her into town. Not directly, but weaving in gentle arcs through the narrow lanes, past shops and cottages, all half familiar but tinged with ghosts. Eleanor hadn't walked this part of town since Lily disappeared. She'd driven through when necessary, nodding politely to neighbors, but never stopped, never lingered. Now she was here, watching Whiskers hop up onto a stone wall, then down again into the small garden beside what used to be the florist's shop. The window was still dusty with the outline of petals where displays used to sit. "Well, I'll be," came a voice behind her. Eleanor turned to see Mrs. Alder, the woman who used to run the bakery 2 streets over, leaning on her cane with wide eyes. "That your cat?" the woman asked. Eleanor hesitated. "Sort of." Mrs. Alder smiled faintly. "Looks just like the cat your daughter used to draw all the time. White with one blue eye, one green. I always thought she had a good imagination. Called him her guardian, I think. Said he'd save her one day." Eleanor's breath caught. "She said that?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Alder nodded. "Every time she came into the bakery, used to ask if I had any cat-shaped cookies. Said the white cat would come when she needed him." Whiskers stood still in the garden, tail upright like a flag. Eleanor nodded faintly, murmured a goodbye, and followed the cat again. From that day forward, Eleanor kept a small notebook in her coat pocket. She began jotting down each place Whiskers led her. An old footbridge, the moss-covered wishing well, the boarded-up schoolhouse. Places Lily had once loved. Places Eleanor had forgotten or forced herself to forget. At each stop, she lingered. She listened. Sometimes it was a sound, the wind catching the same notes her daughter once hummed. Sometimes it was a sight, a chipped toy spinning in the grass, a scrawled note on an old wall, nearly faded. And through it all, Whiskers walked ahead. Never rushed, never paused for long. He seemed to know the exact path she needed. Until one foggy morning. The air was cold and still, the kind of quiet that made sound feel sacrilegious. Eleanor opened the door to find the mist lying thick and low over the fields. Whiskers stood at the edge of the porch, eyes fixed once more on the woods. Eleanor stepped outside. He didn't look back this time. With one graceful bound, he slipped into the fog and vanished among the trees. Eleanor called his name once, twice. Silence answered. She stood alone on the path, heart thudding with a sudden hollowness. The kind that feels like something just slipped out of your grasp. She looked down. In the dirt was a single, fresh paw print, and beneath it, scratched faintly into the ground, the strange spiral triangle symbol from Lily's drawing. Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her chest, her eyes scanning the foggy woods ahead. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The fog clung to Eleanor like a second skin as she stepped beyond her yard, past the crumbling stone wall, and into the woods she had spent 3 decades avoiding. Branches groaned above her, heavy with moisture and memory. The last time she'd walked this path, she was younger, frantic, and calling Lily's name into a silence that never answered. Now she followed Whiskers. The cat moved with fluid certainty, tail raised, paws silent on the damp leaves. The deeper they went, the thicker the fog became, swallowing sound and light. Eleanor didn't know where she was anymore, or maybe she did somewhere deep inside. And then she saw it, tucked between two gnarled oaks, half collapsed under years of wind and rot, was a treehouse. Her breath caught in her throat. The rope ladder still hung, frayed and moss-covered. She stepped closer, every joint in her body aching from more than just age. Carved into the tree's bark, just above the ladder, were 4 crooked letters. Lily. Her legs almost gave out. With trembling hands, Eleanor climbed, slow, careful, each rung a memory. Whiskers was already inside, sitting amid the shadows like a sentinel. The interior was damp and faded, but pieces remained. A dusty blanket in the corner, a rusted tin of crayons, paper scattered and yellowing. The walls were covered in more of the same spiral triangle symbols, drawn over and over, some neat, some frantic. Eleanor knelt on the warped wooden floor. Among the mess was a torn purple backpack. Her breath hitched as she opened it. Inside, a cracked plastic flashlight, a half-empty juice box, and a school photo, Lily, age 10, smiling with 2 missing front teeth. Tucked in the back pocket was a tiny notebook. She flipped through it, heart pounding. "He watches me from the trees." One page read in child's handwriting. "I don't think he likes the cat." Another page was just the symbol, drawn in red crayon over and over until the paper nearly tore. Eleanor pressed the notebook to her chest, her vision swimming. Then her fingers brushed something tucked beneath a warped floorboard. A voice recorder. It was small and pink, with faded stickers of stars and cats along the sides. She remembered it. Lily had begged for it on her 9th birthday. Hands shaking, Eleanor pressed play. Static. Then a voice, faint and small. "This is Lily. Day 3, I think. I don't know what to do. He came again last night. He doesn't like Whiskers. He says Whiskers doesn't belong here." The tape crackled. "But I think Whiskers is trying to help me. He keeps showing me paths. I'm going to try to follow one tomorrow." Silence. Eleanor dropped the recorder as the world spun around her. The ground rose up fast. Then everything went black. She woke to the sound of soft purring. Whiskers lay curled beside her, pressed against her ribs, warm and steady. The fog still hung thick outside the treehouse windows, but a faint glow filtered through, like dawn trying to break. Eleanor sat up slowly, her body stiff and cold. The recorder lay beside her. She hadn't imagined it. Her fingers reached for it, more cautiously this time. She didn't press anything, but the recorder clicked on. The light blinked red, and Lily's voice, softer now, like a whisper wrapped in static, spoke again. "He's still here." Eleanor froze. Whiskers stood, his fur suddenly on end, blue and green eyes sharp. Outside, the fog shifted. Eleanor looked out the small window. There, in the mist between the trees, was a tall, dark shape. Too tall for a person. Motionless. Watching. She backed away from the window, heart hammering. Whiskers moved between her and the wall, tail lashing, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Eleanor clutched the recorder and Lily's notebook to her chest. Whatever had happened to her daughter, it wasn't finished. But now neither was she. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by drawings. The air smelled faintly of rain and dust, and Whiskers lay curled by the radiator, tail flicking slowly. Light filtered in through the lace curtains, catching edges of crayon and graphite, the strange symbols Lily had drawn, but also something else Eleanor hadn't noticed before. A boy. He appeared again and again in the pages. In the corner of a treehouse, beneath a branch, standing in the distance, just behind Lily. His face was always the same. A mop of dark curls, wide eyes, an uncertain smile. He wasn't just in one picture. He was in nearly all of them. Eleanor leaned closer. The drawings changed subtly, Lily growing older from page to page, her lines more confident. But the boy remained unchanged, frozen in time. "Who are you?" Eleanor whispered. She knew one place where old names and dates lived longer than memories. The library sat on Main Street, wedged between the shuttered bakery and the post office. It smelled of mildew and forgotten things, which somehow made Eleanor feel less alone. She took a seat at the microfilm reader, pulling spools of local newspaper archives from the 1990s. Her fingers trembled as she scanned headlines. Nothing for a while: town council meetings, fishing boat schedules, the annual pie contest. Then it hit her like a punch to the ribs. Missing boy. Search continues for local child Jacob Weller. Dated just 6 weeks before Lily disappeared. Eleanor read every word. 10 years old. Vanished after playing near the woods behind his house. His parents claimed he spoke of a glowing door and a girl in the forest. No trace of him was ever found. A coldness pressed into Eleanor's chest. She pressed her palm to the page, tracing the boy's picture. It was the same face from Lily's drawings, and she had never heard of him. The librarian, an older woman with kind eyes, paused nearby. "Looking into the Weller boy?" she asked gently. Eleanor nodded. "My daughter." Lily vanished around the same time. The woman's expression shifted to one of sad recognition. "I remember. People said it was a curse. Some thought the woods were haunted. Others blamed the fog." Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you think?" The woman hesitated, then said, "Some children see things we can't, and some walk farther into the woods than others dare to go." That night, Eleanor returned home with a mind full of fog and names that no longer had faces. She made tea, trying to ignore the weight on her chest. Whiskers watched her from the bookshelf, eyes blinking in slow, thoughtful rhythm. Then he moved. He jumped down, padded across the floor, and pawed at the bottom drawer of the credenza, where Eleanor had stashed Lily's old sketchbooks. Curious, she opened it. Whiskers reached in with a delicate paw and pulled out a single page she hadn't seen before, one stuck between the bindings. It was a drawing, crayon on faded paper. Lily had drawn herself unmistakably, curls and all. And beside her was Eleanor, older, with silver hair and a long coat. They stood hand in hand before a glowing doorway in the middle of the forest. Beyond it, light poured out like sunlight through stained glass. A cat sat in front of the door, as if guarding it. Eleanor stared at it, heart pounding. It wasn't a memory. It was a message. She held the page in trembling fingers, whispering, "What did you see, Lily?" Whiskers brushed against her leg, purring gently. Then he turned his head toward the front of the house. The wind picked up outside. A sudden, chilling creak echoed from the hallway. Eleanor rose and walked to the front door. It was wide open. She hadn't unlocked it. No footsteps, no breeze. Just the thick fog curling at the threshold. She stepped forward, barefoot, heart pounding louder than the wind. The forest was barely visible through the swirling mist. Behind her, Whiskers meowed once. A quiet, insistent sound. She turned and looked at him. His eyes glinted with something between urgency and calm. Then, from outside, she heard it. A child's laugh. Faint, echoing. Impossible. Lily. No answer. But she didn't need one. She stepped back inside, shut the door gently, and leaned against it. She didn't know what came next. But she knew now. There was something waiting in the woods. Something unfinished. And Lily hadn't been alone. The fog was thinner this time. Not gone, never gone. But parting just enough to let the moonlight guide Eleanor's steps. Whiskers walked ahead, his white fur nearly glowing as he weaved through gnarled roots and overgrown grass, retracing a path Eleanor never remembered walking but somehow knew in her bones. The forest whispered. Leaves rustled without wind. Shadows shifted like memories. The treehouse stood waiting. Its wooden planks sagged more than before, and the carved name Lily was barely legible under the moss. Eleanor climbed the creaking ladder with effort, joints aching with every step. Whiskers was already inside, tail twitching as he pawed at a rotting floorboard. She knelt beside him. A breathless hush surrounded them as she pried the board loose. Beneath it lay a dark hole, narrow, root-choked, and pulsing with a faint glow. Whiskers didn't hesitate. He slipped through like liquid shadow. Eleanor hesitated only a moment longer, then lowered herself in. The air changed as soon as she entered the tunnel. It wasn't just damp earth and buried time. It was a kind of energy, like walking into a room filled with held breath. The dirt walls glimmered faintly, etched with familiar symbols. They pulsed in rhythm, as though alive. The passage wound downward, narrowing, twisting like a burrow carved by something ancient. Roots coiled like veins through the earth, brushing her arms and face as she passed. She should have been afraid, but there was only one thing stronger than fear: hope. And Whiskers was waiting. At the end of the tunnel, the passage opened into a small, domed cavern beneath the hill. The light here came from no lamp or sun. It glowed from the walls, the air, the center, where a pool of silvery mist hovered just inches above the ground, suspended like a dream caught mid-breath. Eleanor stepped inside. Time fell away. The air held a stillness so complete it felt sacred. A silence that wasn't empty but listening. Then came the laughter. High, light, musical. Eleanor turned sharply, and her heart stopped. There they were, Lily and the boy Jacob. They were running in circles through the mist, their laughter echoing as though on loop. Lily's curls bounced as she ran. Jacob's voice joined hers in joy, but their eyes were wide, locked on Eleanor. They looked directly at her, pleading. She reached for them. Lily, Jacob, but her arms passed through the air. They didn't stop running. Couldn't. The laughter didn't change. It looped again, and again. A memory caught in time. Eleanor fell to her knees. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here now." Whiskers stepped forward. He looked at her once. Deep, ancient, knowing. Then, without hesitation, he leapt into the glowing mist at the center of the room. The pool shimmered violently. Lily and Jacob stopped. The loop cracked. Their heads turned, eyes wide not with fear, but recognition. The mist pulsed brighter, and Eleanor knew what she had to do. Tears filled her eyes as she stood, breathing ragged, her hands shaking. She stepped to the edge of the mist and shouted into it, "Take me instead." The chamber trembled. The glowing symbols flared, casting shadows across her face. The mist began to rise, swirling around her legs like fog, pulling at her gently, curiously. She closed her eyes and let it take her. The morning light was soft when Eleanor opened her eyes. It filtered through cream-colored curtains that swayed gently with the sea breeze. Her body felt heavy, worn, like she'd been carrying something for decades and had finally set it down. She was in her bed, her real bed. The creaky old house on the cliff still surrounded her. And yet, something was different. She sat up slowly. The photos on the wall were not the ones she remembered. The old family portrait, faded, cracked, was gone. In its place hung a vibrant photo of a smiling young woman standing on a beach with the wind in her hair and a child beside her. Her heart skipped. She rose and shuffled toward it. Lily, but older, mid-30s now, hair darker, face wiser, but unmistakable. The child beside her had her eyes. "Mom!" The voice behind her froze Eleanor in place. She turned, and there stood Lily, alive, real, flesh and blood. Eleanor's knees buckled, and she would have collapsed if not for the arms catching her. "Easy," Lily whispered, holding her mother like she had always been there. Tears blurred everything. "You're here. But how?" Lily smiled sadly, brushing back Eleanor's hair. "I've always been here, Mom. You just forgot. Or maybe the world forgot us. But I never stopped trying to get back to you." Eleanor wept into her daughter's shoulder. She noticed Lily hadn't aged the way she had. Eleanor's hands were more wrinkled than before, her reflection in the hallway mirror unfamiliar. Like time had moved faster for her alone. But it didn't matter. Not now. Later, as the kettle hissed and warm tea filled the room with comfort, a soft thud came from the windowsill. "Whiskers," His white fur gleamed in the light, his green and blue eyes steady and calm. He didn't come inside. He didn't need to. He simply watched, tail wrapped around his paws, as if confirming his job was done. Lily laughed softly when she saw him. "That cat again," she said. "He was always in my drawings. I never knew why. I think he kept me safe." Eleanor nodded. "He found me when I was ready to remember." Outside, the fog had lifted. For now. In the weeks that followed, the town buzzed with whispers. They spoke of Eleanor's transformation. How the reclusive widow who had barely spoken to anyone in years now walked the lanes with her daughter and grandchild. They wondered why the lights in her house glowed again at night. Why her eyes looked older, but lighter somehow. Some called it a miracle. Others muttered about lost memories, head injuries, divine intervention. But no one knew the truth. No one but Eleanor. And Whiskers. She wrote everything down. Not for the town, not even for Lily, but for whoever needed to know someday. Because the fog forgets, but stories remember. One early morning, Eleanor woke with a start. The windowsill was empty. She stepped outside and looked across the cliffs, into the soft gray mist rolling in again. Down the hill, just barely visible through the haze, a white shape moved steadily toward town. Graceful, sure-footed. Whiskers. She watched him disappear. No call to stop him. There was no need. Across town, a small boy sat alone at a second-story window, chin resting on his hand. His room was too quiet, his house too empty. He blinked, and then, out of the mist, came a white cat with one green eye and one blue. He sat by the gate, waiting. Years passed like pages turning in a well-loved book. Eleanor's house by the cliffs remained filled with life. Laughter in the kitchen, drawings on the fridge, tiny muddy shoes at the door. Lily's daughter, Ava, grew up hearing the story of the cat with two colored eyes who found her grandmother on a foggy night. Eleanor never claimed it was magic. She never tried to explain what happened in the woods, or the passage of time that bent and rewound itself. Some things, she believed, were meant to stay just slightly out of reach, like the fog itself. But she always kept a candle lit in the window, and each year on the same evening, when the sea whispered a little louder and the wind stirred the grass in strange patterns, Eleanor would place a saucer of milk outside, just in case. In another part of the town, the boy at the window, his name was Leo, found that same cat waiting by his gate more than once. He told his parents, but they laughed. "Just a stray," they said. But Leo knew better. The cat had never asked for food or shelter. He simply appeared, during storms, after dreams, and once, on the day Leo's grandfather passed away, curling up quietly on the porch as though mourning with them. Leo kept a journal. He started drawing symbols, writing dreams, whispering secrets to the cat when no one else listened. He named him Whisper. Sometimes, Eleanor would catch glimpses of Whiskers in dreams, perched on her old windowsill, tail flicking like a heartbeat, or wandering through doorways of light, the ones only the lost could see. She believed he had been sent by something or someone older than time itself, a guardian for the ones on the edge of forgetting. Because some memories go missing, some children too, some hearts break so quietly the world never hears. But somewhere, in the thickest part of the fog, a cat with one green eye and one blue still walks, still choosing, still remembering.